Hello, this is Robert Caudell, and you are listening to Think on This. First of all, I would like to give a shout out in honor of those who lost their lives due to the terrorist attacks back in September 11th of 2001. The question's always asked, where were you? If I remember right, I was in my 6th grade class. We actually watched it on the television as right after the first tower was hit, and then we watched it all the way up until the second tower fell. And then I remember when we got home from school, we watched the coverage of the aftermath and finding out what the death toll was and finding out all the heroes that were involved in it. So I just want to give a shout out to all those who serve, also our fire department, volunteer, full-time, our EMTs, and our police officers. I know in today's day and age, police officers especially are facing a lot of scrutiny given situations that have happened, and while some have merit, I'm thankful for people who put their lives on the line to keep us safe in any circumstance, whether it's an emergency from natural disaster or attacks, foreign or domestic. So I just want to make sure I give a solid shout out to all of you and thank you for your service. Then I'd also like to give a shout out to our soldiers and all the branches of the military for what they do. The same applies, that they put their lives on the line. I know a number of people that are my friends that are on active duty, and I'm very grateful and thankful for them for what they do. Their courage is amazing. It amazes me, and I'm thankful for that. So I want to make sure that I give that shout out because of what today is. Then I'd also like to get to our text, which is in Matthew. We've been going through the book of Matthew, talking about the parables of Jesus, and today we're going to talk about the parable of the wheat and the weeds. It is the verses I'm going to read is Matthew chapter 13, 24 through 30, and it says, "He put another parable before them, saying, The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? He said to them, An enemy has done this. So the servant said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Gather the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." Okay, so looking at that first statement Jesus says, where he's talking about the kingdom of heaven being compared to a man who sowed good seed. Obviously, the man is God, and the seed that is sown is people. And as the parable goes on, that gives us a little bit of context. The good seed are believers, currently and potentially. The man sowing the seed, like I said, is God. The enemy is Satan, who is sowing seeds that look like good seed when it grows, but when it reaches the end of its cycle, it's obvious which is wheat and which is weeds. So when the plants come up and bore grain, Jesus says this, and the servants of the master, they're asking him, it's like, I thought you sowed good seed in your field. How does it have weeds? So this question shows us that God will only do good. He is strictly, ultimately, and exclusively a righteous being. It astonishes them that because of this, because of who their master is, how could there be bad seed with the good? And so basically, the man says, an enemy has done this. And then they ask, well, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to go out and gather them? And he tells them no, because if you go out there, you're not going to know right away what's good. You may not know at all what's good and what's bad. You may tear up the good along with the bad. So I think this is where we're going to park on this parable. The biggest mistake that's often made in Christian leadership or even Christian evangelism is Christians take mistakenly the position as judge when it's not their place. And the problem with this is the lack of knowing who is real and who isn't. You know, a lot of people will say, well, you shouldn't judge this person. You should. Well, and in this case, when you put it in this context, that's absolutely right. Because only God can see the heart. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't call out sin. We don't take a stand against sinful activity and deal with it, because there are biblical principles that tell us that we're actually not obeying God's word if we don't take a stand against sin. So don't undermine that, but then also realize that what this is talking about is not tearing people and condemning people. That's what God is saying. Don't go out and condemn the bad people, because you might also be condemning the good people. Now, make sure you understand when I say bad and good. Good is those saved by the grace of Jesus Christ. You know, what makes us righteous in God's eyes is not anything we do. It's all what God does. We need to remember that, and I know I need to elaborate on that when I say that, because a lot of people think good deeds are what get you to heaven. That's not the case. God's the one that God's the one that sowed this seed and grew it and made it to what it is. Satan will manipulate people to hinder them from receiving the gospel, or even as Christians living the Christian life. And as we can see, that's an aspect of Satan in this parable, where bad seed was sowed and weeds ended up growing. And now it's difficult to tell who's who, because right next to each other, while they're growing, they look almost identical. But then when the harvest comes is when you actually see the difference. And that being said, let's go to the very last phrase. It says, let both grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. So what you see here is God is saying, take the weeds, and because now they'll be able to tell, and God is the one that's directing the reapers. He's the one that's saying, okay, you need to get these people who are not mine. They're not my children. They're children of darkness. They're children of Satan. It's like you need to get them and move them on to judgment. But the wheat, they will go and be placed into my barn. The children of God will be placed in my kingdom, where they'll be kept for all of eternity. So, I mean, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, I'm elaborating on this. This is not actually what this passage says, and it doesn't translate that way, but this is what Jesus is alluding to in this parable. There is going to come a time of judgment. That's what this parable is about. It's about judgment. And it's judgment of the good seed and the bad seed, the judgment, the parting of the children of God from the children of Satan. And I think it's, like I said, I want to remind you, it's especially important that we don't take the place of God in dealing with, who's real and who isn't, as far as a genuine born-again Christian goes. But I also wouldn't want to deter from us saying, by saying, don't say anything at all. I mean, sinful activity should be dealt with. I mean, we have to deal with it in our children. Superiors have to deal with that with their subordinates in whatever aspect, whether it's, manufacturing environment, whether it's, the police, they have to make judgment calls. Judges, have to make those types of calls. So you need to deal with immoral behavior, with wrong actions, but you got to remember that we're dealing with the action, not necessarily the person when it comes to Christians. We're supposed to take a stand against sin, and then we're also supposed to, because we're not supposed to judge other people the way God ultimately judges people, is so that we can plant a seed to win people to God, to win people to Christ, to show them the gospel, to show them what God can do for them if they put their faith and trust in Him and stop depending on their own works, their own righteousness. That's what's so important about this as we work through this passage. So, when you consider the parable of the wheat and the weeds, the practical thing I would say is this is obviously a parable about judgment, but I think it's also a parable about evangelism. We don't know who's who. And that's why God's waiting until the harvest to separate everyone out. because only God knows. God is the only one that knows the heart. He knows who his true followers are and who his true followers will be. And while that, and we're in a time of grace where we don't know who is going to be born again, but we are obligated to advance the gospel so that people will come to God. And I think it's important that we remember that as we consider this passage, and as we go about our daily lives dealing with people. There's a lot of people that we may not like, or we may think, oh, they're just plain downright evil, but the fact of the matter is that's not our call to condemn them, our call to judge them. Obviously we stand against sin, but then our focus should be to share the gospel and share it in love and speak the truth so that we can plant the seed, and that the Holy Spirit can work and regenerate them through the preaching and the teaching of his word. This is Think on This with Robert Caudell. Thank you for listening.